Hello and welcome to Coach Talk, the show more interested in ideas and philosophy than facts and history. My guest this week is Zaboutine. He's currently a caster in the French scene, but previously worked as a coach on teams in the LCS and for players in the LEC. He has a very clear and understandable view of the game, which gives him a unique perspective, both in analysis and coaching. We talked about the problems with the LEC, the lack of systematic thinking about the game, and how the LFL has become such an unbelievable success. A lot of the questions and discussions are continuations of things that he has explored both on his YouTube channel and his appearance on the Best Damn League show. So check either of those out if you want more context, although the YouTube is in French. This episode is once again brought to you by Coachify. So for those who don't know, Coachify is a coaching platform that, alongside payments, scheduling and practical things, makes tools for coaches. You can set up live VOD reviews, anchor your messages to specific timestamps in videos for future use, and even set up the auto-tracking of goals with the Riot API. I understand that learning a new set of tools can be daunting, but with coaching as competitive as it's becoming, anything we can do to set ourselves apart is a fantastic opportunity. While I was working, even in the LEC, I was just using a pen and paper, but I'm 30, so I have an excuse. Now is as good a time as any to add something new to what you offer and make it as clear as possible for your players. So if you're interested in checking out Coachify, you can do so with the link below. They have a bunch of free options, which I suggest you check out first, although there are extra tools more catered to teams behind a paywall. If you do decide to look into Coachify, please drop me a message on Twitter and let me know your feedback, as we're working together to try and create the best tools possible for coaches. Lastly, if you enjoy this episode, please like, share and subscribe. And if you're interested in exploring mentoring or any of the other things I do to support coaches in the scene, follow me on Twitter, where you can find all the other links you'll need. And now, without further ado, Zaboutine, what is coaching?
That's a very open-ended question. I think in the realm of esports, coaching has been interpreted as being very knowledgeable about the game and kind of being a teacher for these young kids that just play the game in a very different manner, which is the solo queue, and trying to bring them to the level of the competitive. When I started in Optic in 2018, late 2017, 2018, Riot actually paid a professional coach, like a general coach, to teach all the coaches and all the staffs about coaching. And I think that his definition was way more interesting than the one we usually share. He was saying that what we call coaching is usually composed in three parts, which is teaching, mentoring, and actually coaching. And sometimes you're being a teacher, a mentor, because although I'm not good at the game, I've been through life more. Like, I'm 35, most of the players are like 18 or 19, so you can mentor them through the hardships of trying to get good at something. And then there is the last part, which is the coaching. And coaching for me is creating performance through the creation of a belief within someone. If someone has the belief that he's able to execute something and he's done it enough times, and there are a lot of diverse circumstances, then usually he's able to reproduce it at the key moment, especially if he has the belief, right? If you give a 3-point to Stephen Curry under pressure, he'll do it. The reason for it is because he knows he has a higher chance than anyone else in the world to do it. And to me, that's kind of what coaching serves. That's why a lot of my content revolves around analyzing how naturally players or staffs or the industry as a whole works in the most efficient way, and try to reinforce that instead of trying to make a cookbook out of a game that is League of Legends, because it's an open game, and since we haven't figured out chess, there is 0% chance we'll figure out League of Legends. So yeah, I feel like coaching is way more the science of creating positive cycles, and usually the action of coaching is usually asking very impactful questions for the players to make a step forward in his own reflection about what's good for himself and what he's actually competent at.
I think a lot of times we end up focusing a lot on the analysis part of coaching, you know, the breaking down the game and the talking about a game. You mentioned there that it's about creating a belief in the player. Would you say you need to be kind of charismatic as a coach? Because as soon as you're talking about like creating a belief in someone, I love the point at the end where it becomes a lot about the questions you're actually asking rather than making a great speech. But do you think you need to be able to do that, or is that just like an added extra if you have it?
I'd say, and that's why it's such a soft field. You know, it's a very bulk. It's very, I don't know how to say it in English, but it doesn't really have a defined shape. Like everybody, you know, will define coaching differently. I firmly believe that everybody can have an input positively towards a player in any type of game. And that's why you see diverse profiles and diverse methodologies to achieve that. And it already happens. I know a little bit about coaching in soccer, and you already see that different coaches have very different way of making players train. And sometimes just players really enjoy it because it naturally revolves around the way they framework their own work. Sometimes it doesn't apply. So charisma is one of these leverages where you can create a feeling. And from this feeling, right, like, you know, this, I'd say, trinity of emotions create motivation, and then create action, and action creates, you know, and you can start any point in this cycle, opposite to what people believe generally. So because of that, like if you're charismatic, you can empower someone's emotion, create the motivation, and then trigger the action. That's, if the action is good, it's gonna trigger, you know, the emotion, and then you're gonna get into a positive cycle. But you have coaches that will never give you this, you know, peplum movie speech. Not everyone is Yamato, and they work very fine. I mean, I've interacted a little bit. I wouldn't say like a lot, but enough to know Mac, for instance, that has a pretty good record, or Striker. And I think that words are very important, no matter the way you use them in coaching. Although I don't think that being motivational in the sense of creating a specific level, emotion is not as required as people think it is.
Everyone wants
You're
to
not a
have,
prophet.
yeah, and everyone wants to have that clip, you know, from the whatever it is, LEC
Yeah.
voice comms or whatever, of them rousing everybody because it's very, very shareable. You mentioned at the beginning of your answer that you said coaching in esports is so. With your experience seeing it in football, do you see it as different elsewhere? Like, is it fundamentally different elsewhere, or is it just the actual approaches are different and what's going on underneath is the same?
I think coaching will work in any field. That's why you see life coaches, you see weight loss coaches, you see any type of coaches, right? It's kind of a rope that you hold, you know, not to fall when you're doing something hard. And God knows how hard it is to become the best player in the world at the becoming just the best in Europe at something is already very hard. Like your average baker is probably not the best baker in his country. Your banker is probably not. So we ask a lot from these young players. So I think that the difference between sports and esports comes from the fact that the game, the underlying game that we are interacting with, is not updated in sports. Meaning that we have, for instance, football or even probably basketball. We have a track record of hundreds of matches, of data, we kind of broke down the game, and then you can decide the way you want to create your own framework to work in the game. League of Legends is a very different thing because it's kind of a chessboard. Imagine chessboard, but like, I don't know, 10,000. And every parameter of the game, occupies one specific square on your chessboard. But the chessboard changes itself. And then there is special, like, special pawns. And it's very hard because of the update. So we usually scrap the surface of what the game has to offer on a patch, and that's why I think the audience and the staff scatter so much towards analysis, because just knowing what's good is already such an edge in our field that people think it's the only thing that matters. And I think that we've done that for the last 10 to 12 years, where we're convinced that building performance is just knowing what's good.
And because the sort of cycle of a team is so short, it just feeds into
as
that,
well.
and then it just loops over and over. Where having a team together for more than a year is like a shock. I mean, one of the points you made on Best Damn League Show was that the if T1 had been a European team and won, they were not staying together again. Although I also think if they'd have come second as well the year before, they wouldn't have stayed together again.
Yeah, I mean, I think our ecosystem. We're probably getting a little bit ahead in terms of topic, but the European, I would say, the Western ecosystem of League of Legends specifically is a very immature, because it has been seeking its own identity the last 10 years and losing it through the process of finding it. The more you try to look what you should be doing, and the further away from what you should do you're doing. And if you look like NA, I think that the complex of NA, of not accepting to be just the region it is, has destroyed the region.
Okay.
Instead of saying, guys, we're probably not the best, we probably don't have the best player base, we probably don't have the best systems, but instead of doing like what Vietnam or Japan does, which is like producing one or two decent teams that try to go for the upset, this irrealistic belief that this region, because it's big and rich, should be able to compete, and trying to kind of retro-engineer what the Korean or the Europeans are doing ahead of them, and trying to integrate it like as a raw thing. You just take a block from elsewhere and putting it, and not having an endemic solution on like how do we want to produce gameplay in League of Legends, has destroyed the region. Like you look at the current state of NA LCS, and there is some coaches and people that I do know that are very clever about the game, but I really feel like the region has started from a blank page for like 7 years in a row. And in Europe, we are slowly but steadily following that slope, where we are trying to retro-engineer once again what Korea and China is doing, instead of trying to breed a playstyle of League of Legends that caters to our culture. And so we're losing ourselves during this process.
Mm. I think it's a really good point. I'm just as you're talking, I'm thinking it's almost like in the last few years, with the increase in the money and the budget and teams and all that kind of thing, people have had more staff and maybe more kind of coaching time. But actually with that, they've just been doing kind of more analysis of what the best teams in the world do, and we end up copying them more and more. I mean, we can get on to actually, I'll just skip around because there's loads of stuff there we can talk about. You were talking in a recent video about how SK found their identity, but then lost it, in the game against G2. And everyone in this region just, I mean, you said it there, like in the process of trying to find our identity, we've lost it. Can you explain that a little bit more? Like, what was our identity before and what have we got to now? Because I mean, the very surface level thing is just, I remember when going to Worlds, the first week of Worlds was the best for EU because we were ahead of everyone else, and then everyone would copy EU. Suddenly everyone else is playing Aatrox like before the rework. And if we were going to do anything of their ever deep runs, it was going to be by doing something different. Whereas now, the first week of LEC is the same as the first 3 weeks, but the second week looks so different because we're all just playing what they did in LCK, and it was like we waited until the LCK games before we were told what we were allowed to play. And so how do you see that beyond just the surface level with suddenly just copying champions?
I mean, SK, for instance, is a team that has been built around the idea that Niski is a playmaking in a sense of like, he's almost game making player. Like he creates events in the game, like naturally. Like a game is more eventful when you have Niski because he's just eager to play a suboptimal laning phase to make sure he always have the ability to move around the map and bring this man up on the opponent to force them to make a decision that's gonna get them outside of their comfort zone, right? If you look at the first game of SK, they've always tried to make sure that their jungle smashes mid with Niski to the point where enemy mid laner will have to respect Niski's options, and then they will immediately transfer that to the bot side of the map. And trying to deny as much as they can from the enemy bot for their support to connect. Because once DOS and Isma work together, and Niski can move with them, then SK starts to be the team we know. The problem is, yes, I know that the meta has changed, and we've seen kind of a slowing down of the game, especially with the rise of a pick such as Corki that prevents, like Azir and Corki they are very, very terrible picks in terms of design because they just slow down the pace of a game with extraordinary wave clear, extraordinary scaling, pretty decent laning, and on top of that, they have a huge range and poke, meaning they invalidate a lot of the siege that you want to have on them. And if you can't siege on League of Legends 1, 2, 3, 4 waves, and you can just wave clear, it just naturally extends the time of the game. And they are very extremely good champion later. And I think that SK is trying to embrace that, thinking, oh, this is the most efficient tactic available. The truth is, SK now ends up with Corki, Xayah, Rakan. So there is no point for a Corki to be like Corki by nature will never be able to win the 2v2 mid jungle. Like no matter you put Faker, you put Prime Chovy, like the best version of Chovy ever anyone's. You'll get 5-6 years ahead. You'll get a good trade. Maybe you get a recall up on your opponent, but that's about it. So then the game becomes very stale. And then I don't think SK is that great at team fighting. I don't think SK is like phenomenal at skirmishing. I don't think that they play the vision and the lines of vision in a very disciplined way, the way BDS does or the way T1 is doing in Korea. What they have for themselves is if they have the lead and their bot lane is ahead and Niski moves toward the bot lane, they usually end up winning more fights than not. And what's very frustrating for me as a region is you saw it. You've seen G2 going to Worlds, playing Maokai, invading enemy Gromp on the first wave and diving with Draven, and beat Weibo, the finalist of the tournament. And you've seen G2 play Ornn, Azir, Xayah, and get smashed by NA. Players that, by the way, people were making fun of, right? I was coaching these players, so I know that the Europeans were making fun of these players, saying they're bad and stuff. But the truth is, stick to your guns. That's the only way. Like, you're not gonna go to a chess player and say, oh, you know what? Like, this guy has insane theory. Like, he has like 60 or 7 move or 100 moves of prep on his openings. Don't play the openings. Make the game chaotic. Play the finals to try to find someone else. Like, you're not like that basic Sun Tzu, you know? It's like, if the enemy is strong, if he has the uphill somewhere, try to fight downhill. You're not gonna try to fight. I mean, who they were playing against? I think it was KC, and the next day was
G2.
SK was against BDS. So okay. Are you gonna send, if it were troops, right? If SK were like actual field troops and they were on a war, would you say Xakik, Niski, Isma, we have 5 archer on the top of his hill, and you're just gonna run at them and try to kill them? No, obviously not, because it seems to be dumb. That's the same thing in League of Legends. Like you're gonna lose because by nature BDS is a team that just does extremely well if they can control vision. So by playing the slow game, you're just gonna walk on walls and you're gonna lose the game. And I feel like we take the example of SK, but I can take many examples during the last day of the LEC, and that's why I mentioned that in my video, where I get slightly frustrated because I felt like it's not a big deal, right? It's winter split. It's just, it shows, it's a very good stigma of what NA was doing wrong, what G2 did wrong during Worlds, what T1 kind of did wrong until they came to quarterfinals and were like, we're gonna impose our win condition, what JDG tried to do. You see that every single team, like we have enough data now, right? We were speaking about traditional sports, we had a lot of data. We do not control the change of the game. Riot does. But what we've seen is over the years, teams that try to betray their identity to try to play what's the most efficient available end up losing. So maybe you got to find another pick. Maybe you have to get something that's probably a 7 out of 10 in lane. That's probably not the best. Maybe you're going to have to be half an item down. Maybe you're going to have to trade off something to be able to play your playstyle. But what's certain is if you try to play the Corki Xayah game and your name is SK Gaming, I don't see you go very far.
I think it's really
Sorry,
good. I
long
mean,
monologue.
no, it's really good. I always ended up with like 5 different questions, but I'll just touch on a few of the things you mentioned. Firstly, I think the chess analogy is absolutely perfect. For anyone who wants to explore this a bit more, there's a documentary called Magnus, I think it's just called Magnus, that's about his first World Championship win where he's playing against Vishy Anand. And Vishy's very famous for, he was one of the first players to really start working with a computer in a very effective way. And so it is exactly that. It's this young kid versus like 10 different analysts who's going to be really prepared in the opening. And the games he won were the games where like, okay, fine, like I'm just going to do things that are suboptimal opening theory, but now we're both just playing the game and you're no longer playing on your, just from your book. Yeah, exactly. So, and I also T1 is a perfect example that I hadn't really thought of. That's exactly what they did at Worlds. It's like they've been playing this, Prio bot is the most valuable thing for every draft. We'll play whatever it takes to get that, if it's Caitlyn, Callista, whatever. Then when it gets nerfed, they kind of go to a few other things and they looked fine. They didn't look great. And then as soon as they start playing their style again, they just force it, even if it's, suboptimal. But suboptimal is such a crazy thing because we talk about suboptimal maybe mathematically, but it's not about what's optimal for anyone other than you. So from the outside, it seems almost obvious, especially when you lay it out like that. So if I was to ask you, why do you think that this happens so consistently from the inside? Why do people convince themselves that they've got to just play the meta? Or, I guess the devil's advocate version would be, well, we've already qualified for playoffs, so let's see if another style works for us. But you're right, it does end up, you end up losing your identity rather than building a second one.
You start doubting.
Yeah.
You doubt. Like, that's the other thing I was saying is every single loss, like you've been working with players, I did, right? I mean, a lot of people give me crap for not having the best track record. Obviously, I was not, like, I'm not Coma. But I've worked with players, the mental impact. Like, I'm never gonna play this pick. How many times did you hear that at least once in a split, you're gonna hear, nah, I'm not playing this champ on stage anymore. Scrims are going fine. Solo queue win rate is around like 55-60% of the champion. Very good execution. Laning is very well understood. Goes on stage, came like a huge comeback because they just screw a Baron play and they get comeback and they're like, oh, I'm never playing Kalista. This champion is dog after 15 minutes. And you're like, that's the worst possible conclusion you could ever make. But no, the belief is here. And the belief is, it can be like, a blessing, but it's a curse as well, because once there is a negative belief, breaking a negative belief can take a lifetime. Sometimes you're never able to do it. So every single loss has an impact on the belief of your players towards their champion, their teammate, and their staff. You cannot say, oh, just gonna lose a few games here and there. No, you lose games because you did absolutely everything you could on a system that you all agreed upon to play, because everybody has the belief that it's good, and then you make the post-mortem of like, were we right? But if you change every single thing in the process, then you don't really have a way to eliminate what's right and what's wrong. And so you end up doing exactly like you were asking, why are we catering to that? It's because there is so much chaos, so much change, so much short-term deadline, so much emotion from the fans, so much criticism, so much pressure from the investors, from the top management. That's like, we paid that much for these players, why aren't we working? And all these questions that are completely stupid, that should not intervene into the process of building performance, that people just fall back on, like, just gonna play Azir. That's fine. Azir's fine. I'm gonna play Azir. But I mean, it's just, that for a fact you're never gonna be exceptional. You're settling if you really, and that's my belief, right? I engage only my voice in that, but if you're trying to play the meta because you think that the champion that have 55% win rate in solo queue are the best on the patch, I firmly believe that you're settling for low. Because if you've done, and I know there is plenty of data analysts that are like, that will listen to this, that are actually currently doing analysis, right, from solo queue and stuff. it is impossible to know really what's good in the game. Like win rate is the only real thing we have. Like we have some differentials of goal, that these thresholds of time and stuff, but in the reality, maybe Kled Mid is the best champion in the game, and maybe it smashes Corki. And if you pick Corki and there is a Kled Mid, you cannot even play the game. Nobody's gonna play it. Nobody knows if it's good. And people would say, Zab is trolling. I'm not trolling. Nobody knows if it's good. Nobody has tried it at the level required to be to know if it's good or bad at the level. Even in LFL level, it's not the case. So in LEC, even less. And then Doinb is gonna play it, and all the kids in the playground are gonna come. It's like, did you see that? Oh my god, Kled with Black Cleaver, so OP, man, so OP. We need to ban this champ. And that's what, for me, you're settling for low, because think, oh, Corki is broken. What did we play against Corki 5 years ago? We played Lysandra. That's weird, right? We are playing Lysandra into Corki. There are really good AP items, and there is an item that actually lowers the cooldown and does more damage. Maybe, And that's where I implore teams to start digging the iceberg of League of Legends and being trusted in the game and looking at it as a raw product instead of trying to retro engineer what their neighbor is doing, because we're going nowhere.
There's this assumption that the better teams, or even if you're coaching in ERLs, the higher level teams are somehow gonna find the best picks. But I always ask when players say that, like, why? Like, what is it about the LPL that's going to give them why are they going to be the ones to find it other than us, other than the bravery of actually being able to do it? And I think another thing that you mentioned, and I definitely want to get onto, is the thing of what systems you have there to make your team successful. And I think because people do put too much emphasis on the analysis part and less emphasis on the systems part, which is almost like the next stage. You analyze what our problem is, and then we create a plan or a system to try and fix it. Because there's less emphasis on that, you're more easily swayed by, there's this game where it just doesn't work, or there's this moment where someone just like does, I don't know, you mess one thing up and suddenly, like you say, this pick is useless, or the other pick is just incredibly OP. Like we lose to Corki a couple of times, and then suddenly there's nothing we can do against it. But in those times, we only did 2 of the options, and there's so many kind of potentials and so many things that we could have done that, yeah, I think being sure as possible on what actually makes you good as a team and what makes you work, and being as clear as possible on that will hopefully allow you to be a bit more confident when stuff starts coming in. But there's this phrase, I can't remember what book it's even from, but something like, no one ever got fired from following the data. And the idea is that if you do what the data says, or in this case what everyone else is doing, and it goes badly, then it's like, it's not really your fault. It's like everyone's playing Azir. Azir is the best champ. But if you try something different and it goes horribly, suddenly it's like, especially the coach, but even the player, like, what are they doing? Like, what as soon as you're playing, what was it, NASA support in certain situations, it's like, what are you doing? So could you explain your take on systems and that, I guess, in very general terms, because it's something you talk about a lot?
I mean, system it's a very general term because it applies to not only the game, but it's the whole thing of creating systemic responses to events to minimize the processing time. So I'm gonna give a game example. For instance, the jungle, when he wants to recall, should call before 1 or 2 camps that is gonna recall after these 1 or 2 camps, because since waves are spawning every 30 seconds, if your bot lane is able to crash a wave, or if your ADC is able to sustain and not die in farm without his support, then the optimal play is for the support to recall and get out of base with the jungle to be able to contest vision around mid and enable a bridge between the mid lane and one side, or retake some pressure on mid lane to relieve the mid laner that probably needs to recall if he's losing his laning phase. This is a non-negotiable. This is a system. This is, guys, I'm recalling. You have to create these things. You know, my first year, I had all this part where I didn't understand mid game as good as I do now, right? 2018, I'm starting as a coach. I have decent knowledge of the game, but nothing near what I have today. I called it vision time. I was like, 17 guys, it's vision time. So I mandated my support to say it's vision time at 17 every single game. No matter what happened, even if it was minus 7k gold on a late scream because we decided to do a late block and the food was way too heavy and the players were sleepy and we had a terrible day of screams. At 17, it's vision time. Because this is the moment where you have nothing else than contest the vision. The Baron is still not there. Dragon is usually like once... I mean, Dragon was not as potent back in 2018. It was kind of like a bad Dragon. It was just between 2014 and 2019, the Drake was... Oh, people didn't care about Drakes. So that's a system, right? It is just... This is all this endless list of things that need to be automatically triggered to have more brain stack to be able to process the things that are going to make the edge. Because once again, and I really want to emphasize with that, because what you say is like nobody gets fired for following the data. And yes, and I think that's most people on this planet, right? I'm not a coach anymore. I've done other jobs. Nobody expects us to be a 10 out of 10 or the best in the world or the best in our country or in our continent at what we are doing. You can go to the office, you can coast for a day, you can send an email like an hour late. No, it's fine. Like even the sender is probably not expecting an answer within an hour, right? It's come on, it's fine. So in sports, when you're competing, when your opponents are refined, right? They're really prepared to actually beat you. They've studied your weaknesses and stuff. Everything needs to be put in order to execute the plan. This is why military don't run and they walk at a very specific pace. It's because order, while being slower, is way better than a fast chaos. And that's the reason you create systems, and that's the reason you cater to your strength. It's because the mental stack that is required, the brain processing power that's required to execute these very, very, very at the limit plays that these players are doing when they're contesting Drake, when they're contesting Vision, when they are trying to posture around a wave to get a CS or get a good poke. If they don't have systems, then they're thinking about the systems. If they're thinking about the systems, then they have to play in autopilot. That's why you see most players in the West, they go in lane and they just don't play it. Because they're thinking, my jungle is going topside, okay, I need to play safe. These things should be automatic. T1 doesn't think. Do you think Faker is thinking about if he needs to call when Keria and Honor are getting out of base? Doesn't call like you. Everybody's like communication. You hear the vocal of T1's like, yeah, I'm healthy. I think we can fight. Go Janna. Good job, guys. And then they're like, oh, we need to think about how to make. No, that's systems.
And the example I always use is the best team fighting team of all time, I would say, is JDG from last year, and they didn't all speak the same language. So it's clearly not just about talking to each other, talking us through every single tiny little detail. One of the things that people say as a kind of counter to this or a negative aspect to this is you talked about the mental stack there. If you start introducing systems for everything, I guess most people would say you have the risk of overloading things. If it's like, okay, at 17 minutes, I've got to make this call about the vision. Whatever it is, 5 minutes, we're going to talk like we have to talk about the Herald swap, or not that anymore. My systems are old because I haven't coached on with the grubs instead. But you're saying that actually you end up reducing the amount of things that we're having to think about by actually creating these patterns where they're repeatable, they're the same every time. So even though it might feel a bit overloading, and you shouldn't go into a team on the first day and say, right, 3 minutes we're going to say this, at 5 minutes we're going to, but you think it reduces the mental load in reality.
I mean, if you could, in a theoretical world, get 5 good players that want to play with each other and draft their absolutely favorite champion that they could play, at 3 a.m. being woken up while being sick, and it will still like be excellent at the champ on stage, with maximum level of focus and determination to do their best, then they have a lot of bandwidth for systems. That's where work comes in place. That's why we're working. That's why it's very important to play a lot of solo queue. If you play a lot, it doesn't apply to only challenger players. Pick any average player and make him play 100 games of Oriana and ask him, do you feel like the team fights are like slower now than when you started? Yeah, it feels way less overwhelming. You have full control of your character. You know most of the matchups. You know your range. You know where you put your ball. You know what are the key to a good shockwave that is going to win the team fight, right? The first time you're going to press R on the tank and it's not going to do nothing. The second time, you're going to wait and dodge a spell with your flash, and you're going to use R when the ADC try to get in after the engage, and you're going to win the fight. It's the same thing for players. The thing is, to try to combine all the things we mentioned about. Players have, let's say, a stack of 100. Playing a champ they like lowers the stack, right? So imagine playing a champion you like is probably going to be 20 or 15. A champion you struggle on is probably going to be 30 or 40. Then if you have to think that you need to get vision instead of having someone telling you that it is the time where you should contest the vision, then you need to actively stop thinking, right? Because after 100, it means that you need to remove things from your stack to actually add. So the harder you work, the least amount of energy your champ or what you're doing is going to cost you. And that's why you cater toward the strengths. And that's why you play your play style. It's because SK, when they have to play a Corki front to back, imagine how much energy Niski, Isma, Exakik, Dofs, and E11 needs to produce in order to become a team fight team. They're used the moment where they think the least about how they need to fight, and they are the most focused on what's going on in their screen, is when their bot lane is ahead and Niski is playing a champion that can actually do trigger play in a game. But then they're playing front to back, and then suddenly they're like, we have a clear example of Larsen. It's a player that I have a lot of respect for, and you see him playing LeBlanc, and because his team is full of crap right now, you see that nobody's talking to anybody. Like it feels very broken. You see him having a perfect flank ward deep into the enemy jungle on a dragon spawn. Dude TPs on mid wave, and they lose the fight and they lose the game while being ahead because he's not a flank player. So now you have this losing team. So you need to think about a lot of things that should be systems. And on top of that, he needs to think about playing LeBlanc that he doesn't play that often. So he doesn't see the world. If he had more mental stack, he would see the world and he would make the play and the team would win. So this, to combine everything, is all of these systems, they are just put in place to lower the amounts of points that you can you have to put to give a buffer to your player, because under pressure, it's gonna rise, and above 100, it's just lost.
I think it's such good points. I think so many people as well, even fans are, I think, probably more guilty of this than other players, but you see, okay, I think I can play 10 different champions in solo queue, so why can't pro players who are paid to play, why can't they play more champions? And it's because you have to make all this stuff habitual, and they have to know the details of it in advance so that you can make some plans. I mean, I was working with a coach actually just yesterday, and we were talking about, well, okay, my player didn't actually know if they get prio in this matchup. And we're just talking about like the first 3 waves. Like they don't know if they can get push. It's like, well, they need to do more work on that champion, because this is one of the things that we need to know, because the second we don't know this, how can we plan our first 5 minutes of the game? If we don't know what lanes we're going to get pushed in and what lanes we are going to be the ones with push, how can we plan anything like that? And then you see as well, there was an example recently that someone did it like really slowed down, and Faker, the end result is he hits a big shockwave. But what he does is he first, I think, ease the Varus as Varus is like jumping into a bush, which moves faster. And then he hides the ball in Azir soldiers. So if you look at it from the other team, it's like, it looks almost like a bug, like you can't see where this is coming from. And he's not thinking that through step by step, consciously thinking it. In the same way that we talk a lot in sport about moving skills to habitual skills. And you look at the best footballers in the world, but before a match, they're passing. And yes, of course, they're warming up. But the point is not, they all are also practicing the skill, not because they need practice passing, but when there's 80,000 fans screaming and someone closing you down really quickly, you need to not be thinking about how do I pass, like how do I control the ball and how do I pass? Like it needs to be like an instant reaction. And therefore, like being consistent with what works for you, I think can give you actually so much more. What I'd like to do... sorry,
go on. No, go on.
Well, I was moving on to the next, the sort of next stage of this, which is what I'd like to do is kind of take people through how they might create some of these systems and maybe where people might struggle with it. So you mentioned there when you first went to Optic, you maybe didn't have as much knowledge, especially as you do now, of course. But if it was a concern, or if it's a concern for someone listening, like what do you... If they listen to what you just said and said, that sounds amazing, I want to do that with my team, I want to have not as many systems as possible, but at least the most important moments for us, I want to systematize them as much as possible, but I'm not sure what you should do every 17 minutes or something. How do you create these systems without just the incredible knowledge of the game?
I mean, that's the point where I feel like this industry is kind of counterproductive, because most of the old coaches that have gathered this experience, and I think being a coach in esports is a lot of experience based. They're usually out, because right now the new toy of owners is to recycle players, thinking that they will know exactly what to tell players to create performance. And I don't blame, I feel like there's a huge value of having a player on board, right? It's just you can't just get at the level of the game where you're going to be able to teach or create systems for LEC players if you haven't dug the game to a point, like almost an absurd point. Like I think that, we always speak about the grind, the solo queues, but there is a grind for coaches and analysts too, for casters as well. Like if you really want, just watch the game, ask yourself questions. You need to be able to break down the game. Ask questions to people. Watch people like Coach Curtis. Watch the reviews of LS. Watch my reviews. Watch maybe your reviews. Watch as much content as you can. Watch the stream of pro players. Ask them questions. It's. I haven't learned all that I do know from just asking someone. And I think that, for instance, I disagree with some of the things that LS says about the game, but I was not able to disagree with him until a certain point of expertise. But I think that he has plenty of very valuable piece of information that people could just, I want to get better? Just watch LS or I Will Dominate. Speak about patch notes, because they're going to give you what makes people win in solo queue and win their lane, because winning solo queue is usually being ahead and then just snowballing, getting more resources, and just breaking kind of the spirit of your opponent. Solo queue is way more about breaking the spirit than strategy. So you're gonna learn a lot about that, about gold value, about item value, and then if you want to, for instance, understand more about the positional aspect of the game, you can watch my content. Okay, it's in French, so sorry for the guys that don't. I'll probably do something, but I think I approach the game from a positional standpoint. Someone like Medios was the person who taught me the most about positional aspect, because he was a chess player. So he was reviewing the game as a chess player, and a lot of things that he said to me resonated a lot. And I was like, that's a very clever way to approach the game. If you want to, and that's the hard work. Put the 10,000 hours, because I did. even though it was a pleasure because I was a caster, because I enjoyed doing it, because I was with friends, because plenty of reason, like people will call it celebrity. I mean, it's like we're esports. Nobody's really famous in esports, right? There's like, it was just fun to share my passion with people. But behind the stage, I've been watching games for 10 years and screams for a stupid amount of screams in Observer to get where I am. So if people want to do, feel free to reach out. I'll be very happy to be able to share, but with a precise question. Don't come to me and say, I want to improve at like League of Legends. That makes no sense. And work the same way. If you expect, like, I don't see a world where you can expect your players to build strong systems or like LEC level system or like world level systems if yourself, you haven't been able to create systems to learn the game, which doesn't require you to execute.
I think as well, like, you end up with, once you start thinking about this in a lot more systematic way, you do end up carrying through things from previous teams, and you end up adding to it over and over again. Because if you think about the precise detail of the game, then maybe when the patch changes, that precise detail is no longer helpful and you have to just leave it. But if you can build something that's more repeatable, then the next team you go to next year, everything's changed. But it's like, okay, you can just look at your system instead of looking at the game and saying, okay, does any part of this need to change? And the other thing that I think is so powerful with this kind of thing is that you will learn more about the game when you start doing this, either by playing or even by watching. If you just watch a game or you watch a piece of content with kind of coming into it with no preconceptions yet, maybe you can learn some things. But if you watch a game thinking like, okay, I think this is how the game works, and then you watch a game and you compare it to your thinking, then you can suddenly start to see, okay, I thought this was going to happen and the complete opposite happened. Is it something wrong with my approach, something wrong with the way they're executing it? If you have something to compare it to, you will learn so much more. So this is kind of a snowball effect where the more you start thinking about these systems, the better you get at creating them, and the better your systems become, and then just goes more and more.
I can give an example that I think is pretty relevant for all the amateur and young coaches out there that or commentator that would like to improve on the game. I still to this day have a subscription to Skillcapped. I think it's a very good platform to learn League of Legends. I think it's probably one of the best resources in the world. But the thing is, I was watching these videos, it's like, get 2 levels ahead in 4 waves. And I was watching this content, and I was playing it, and I was like, oh, that's very easy. And then I would go in a game, very same matchup, and I would get just wrecked. And I was like, why is it that when I'm pushing, I always get gank, and he doesn't? And then I played thousands of games, and then I watched pro players play, and then I was like, there is something that's missing. Because if I can't reproduce it, it means there is... Obviously, I'm very bad mechanically, but I should be able conceptually to execute the same level of tactics against a worse player. That's a higher player than me would do the same, but against just a better player. And so by not doing it and asking myself other questions, so trying to confront, I don't know if you say confront in English, it's like to try to, kind of I'd say... Sorry, it's very hard because I was speaking in French before the podcast, so my English is just gone.
That's okay. I think confront is good.
Yeah, by confronting a different creator to what I've learned in Skill Cap made me realize that there is a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? And so Coach Curtis, for instance, would be like, yeah, of course, the theory is like you push 3, you crash, you harass on the turret, you create a bounce, and then you freeze. But in reality, what's going to happen, because Curtis is a very pragmatic person, is like, what's going to happen? Because you're playing at low elo, your jungle is never going to cover the fact that you're winning your lane. Therefore, I'm going to recommend for most of you guys out there that don't have a perfect positioning and don't know perfectly the limits of your champion to keep the wave in the middle and try to freeze by letting the melee, it was a range versus melee matchup, letting the melee push the wave for you, right? And so I've tried this, and then I was like, and then I spoke with Vitio when I was working with him for 2 years, and I was like, do you think here I shouldn't be better? Because I knew like he was losing the 2v2 mid jungle. I was like, I think we can probably leave the wave in the middle in this one. And then we tried. Like it was like, okay, let's try. and he plays this. I think it was TF versus Sakai or something. He tries and he does the same thing I watched on Coach Curtis, which is you leave the wave in the middle and you change play of that in a way that if the melee trades you in the wave and actually push the wave while trading you, he creates kind of a slow push and then he gets frozen himself. And which he tried and was like, that's a very good idea. And so I saw that a tip that was meant to be used by intermediate player that can't execute the high-end strategy was actually good in some parts and was even applicable at the highest level if you understand the whys you yourself fail at executing it, or like at least seek the why you fail at executing it. And I think like just this story gives a lot of framework to like all these want to be coach or like you want to work in esports or even players. Is like you need to create causality chains in your head that work and that are robust and don't depend on the champion, in a way that champions just become tools to execute these things. Once you have that, you have the baseline to create your system and your framework to play the game.
Yeah, and I love that story because once you build it, you then sort of question it and you look at some other example with that same thing in your head, and then even Vito's approach there of like, let's try it, like that's the absolute perfect thing to do. And the other thing, I mean, you mentioned a bit earlier, we're talking about just coming back to the original question of creating systems if you maybe don't have the best knowledge. If you're on a team as well, especially around certain areas, if you're asking the right questions, you can draw that information out of the group almost. So like between the group, we have enough knowledge to know how to do this. And I think as well, one of the things that you'll find as you go through careers, you know, if this is someone talking to someone listening, the closer you get to the top end, the more coaching becomes exploratory and the less it becomes about the teaching part of things. Because, you know, if you're the absolute best in the world at something, you can't be taught by someone else, you know, unless it's maybe a different area that they know more of for sure. But it's a lot about exploring. And then coming in with this more systematic mindset of exploring with the idea of trying to find any consistency that's repeatable is something that, again, you'll be able to take forward and you'll be able to sort of discover. So, you know, if we have a certain way of approaching an objective and maybe you're not entirely sure what's right, start talking about it and start asking your team about it and try and draw it out of them. And you can draw a system out in a quite, what I would use the words horizontal and vertical. So you can draw the system out in a very horizontal way, but still enforce it in a vertical way where it's like, okay, now we've decided that this is how we're going to play this objective. So the next game, if we don't do that, you can say, why, you know, this is what we were going to do. And it's not, I know more about the game than you, but we have all together managed to create something, some sort of system. And then you can look, okay, does our system need to change or did we just mess up? And then it becomes much kind of, it's not that this is an easy thing to do, but it is something that is available to you if you're not confident in what you've already got. And then you'll become more confident in it because on the next team, it's like, well, the last team, this is how we set up a dragon, or this is how we set up a herald. Whereas if you just approach every single time as a unique situation, then it doesn't help you for the future.
I mean, that's I think one of the struggle that I've had the most during my career. And I think if I have, because I think if I was still like being a coach of a professional league team today, I would still be this weakness. I'm terrible in a review. I hate reviews. I hate the action of reviewing scrims. I think it is very counterproductive because the outcome of a game is an emotional thing for players, right? They've been raised and taught through solo queue to embrace victory and get frustrated during losses. The problem is the process of establishing systems has to get rid of the outcome. Like you need to just value the causality between the system and the outcome of the system and the execution of the system. The problem that you have when you're coaching is you have 5 players that want to know what went wrong. But that's not, scrim is not always about trying to win. You should always try to win every single scrim your hardest, because there is a lot of hidden learnings that you wouldn't get from it, right? It's like, it's all this hidden knowledge that you don't have when you FF, but there are blocks of scrims where you want to work on something, you should just review the thing. And if it doesn't happen because you haven't like you were behind, for instance, like you want to set up Drake Vision. Oh, in this game we screwed lane. Let's not review it, guys. Take a break. No, there is always a player that's gonna come. Yeah, of course, there is all this hidden knowledge and stuff. But like right now, we are in this iteration of trying to establish and review this system. Therefore, we're gonna take this amount of game. We're gonna completely detach ourselves from the result of it, and we're gonna celebrate when we execute the system, and we're gonna be frustrated when the system didn't happen if it was in our control. This is way more important, and I hate and I lose my patience with players that is like, oh, can you come back on Drake at 25? And it's like, no, we're working on the first 15 minutes of the game. Yeah, but we lost the game out of this team fight. Yeah, sure. But it's like, are we trying to establish that? Have we established that this week, right? It's like, it's very frustrating because I know that there is it's very hard, I think, for a lot of people and players to understand the difference between a single occurrence and a systematic happening. And because of that, there is a lot of, for me, at least personally, back and forth where players was like, I know it seems very important for you, but you're missing the bigger picture by trying to focus on this detail. And I want you to have at the same height as everybody else. And it's very hard because emotionally they're involved into the process of winning and losing. So you cannot say that it's a must saying to someone your feelings are invalid, which feelings are always valid, you know. They might be legitimate or not, but they're always valid. Like you feel them, like you're not just, you know, a light being or something. So for this reason, for me, it's very hard, and it's always been very hard because I feel like I've only seen good teams with good systems, and I think there is a huge pushback from players that have been raised into thinking that they need to retro-engineer their win and losses instead of, so when they win, they feel like they have less to review, and then when they lose, they think they have more to review. This is the worst thing. Like if you're in a team and you feel like this is how you're gonna approach, I'm fairly confident that after a year of training, you will be like, if you start at 0%, you will be at 6 or 7%. Because every day you're gonna do like 2 step forwards, 3 step backs.
It's like if we watch everything, we end up learning nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just too much. I mean, I think everything kind of, at least in the last sort of 3 or 4 years of my coaching career, like everything that I started doing that was different actually was about trying to solve this problem. So being more clear about practice that I would call exploratory and practice that I would call like execution practice. And in execution practice, sure, firstly, we're just trying to win. That's the main goal, but also we can look at everything. Whereas when we're trying to explore and learn something or build something new, at least new to us, even if it's not new to teams in general, then that's the thing that matters. And why you lost this game is irrelevant. It's. I mean, again, if we think of chess as an example, there's this guy who does reviews, Agad Mehta, who always has a point where he says, and as of move 9 or as of move 10, we have a completely new game. Like this game has never been played before. And firstly, it always happens way earlier than you'd think. So it is, and as of move 5, we have a completely new game or something like that. But if you imagine that in League of Legends, it's like as of second 2, we have a completely new game. And every time you're watching this dragon, it's never going to happen again. And you have to come to terms with the fact that everything you're watching in the game is never going to happen in that exact way again. And so you need to find the similarities and you need to push a bit deeper and find what's kind of underneath. But I have so much sympathy for coaches, especially newer coaches who really struggle with this, because it is a kind of a battle to do it. Because whether it's a big confrontation or not, at the very least, you're going to have to deal with the fact that every single game, someone's going to ask you, can we look at this? Can we watch this? And if the players are not happy, often the organization will side with them as well. So they're kind of right to be worried about it as well. And I think it's difficult, but it's absolutely worth it. So, you know, if you're listening
mandatory.
To this, yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're struggling with it, the best I can say, I mean, we've got advice as well, but the best I can say is to just trust yourself. Like, this is right.
I felt like if you, it's very important, especially on the internet. I think there is a lot of people that will have a hard time receiving a piece of advice for someone who struggled with the same thing, right? You say, but you were there, right? It's like, I've been in the very specific shoes. If anyone hears this, I've been in your shoes and I've failed miserably at creating a positive, and I think that was my biggest weakness when I was a coach, that I learned after being a coach that no, I would be much better, but back then I felt miserably at being able to define the systems I wanted to work on. In my head, they were clear, but I was never able to create a good middle ground between the players and I to create systems where I felt like the review was valuable for them. And that's why I say to this day, because I haven't done that really after Immortals, I can't say like I've improved. So I would say like to this day, I'm still bad. So it is a very, very, very hard thing because players have been taught, trained, and raised into League of Legends thinking that winning is good and losing is bad. And suddenly you're telling them it doesn't matter. And for them, it's like, it's the same thing as in-house. They have a hard time with in-house because there is no LP. Like the whole game of Riot, like all the Riot games I've designed with this dopamine hit whenever something happens. And suddenly I'm like, don't look at the dopamine, look at the big win after. And that breaks the whole process that even lead them to this moment. So if you struggle with that, you need to do it. Otherwise your coaching is not gonna be effective, and your players gonna be very disappointed once the end of the year happens with themselves, with the team, and with you. But know that it is a common struggle that every single professional coach in League of Legends has, and it's one of the hardest hurdles to overcome. And I think, for instance, Striker, I don't know exactly how he does it, but from looking at his teams, I know this guy does something with his players like Mourinho, you know? It's like you look Mourinho and you see a team just playing completely differently after, and all the players love their coach. So there is something that happens that Mourinho says to his players that make it in a way that everybody hate him, but the player love him. And I think like Striker is kind of the Mourinho of League, at least of the LEC right now, because he has this, like, he's very outspoken and stuff like this. He can look very hard, but at the same time, you look at BDS, you look at the raw material of BDS, you look at the players. It's like Labrov have had so many bad years, right? Nuke was in bottom teams for like 2.5 years. Adam was not performing and you look at them and you're like, yeah, that's definitely the top 2 team in LEC. So there is definitely something that you can do, but you know that it is very hard, but you need to keep pushing. Otherwise, useless.
Yeah, and the BDS keep, what, 4 out of 5 the same, and they bring in a new player, and you can tell, I think, from the reaction to that, just how undervalued this kind of systematic approach is. Because if people are still putting them like really low down or on tier list, like 10th or 9th, which I saw an awful lot, and I don't think anyone expected them to be this good, but the underlying assumption is like, well, they've been together for a year, so they're as good as they could be, and now they've just swapped out a player who people thought might have been their best or something. And this idea that they can't just keep getting better after 1 year together is like, it's really crazy. And if you imagine that in any other sport, it just makes no sense. Like,
just look at T1.
Yeah, exactly. We've
just
seen
look
the
at
best.
T1. I mean, we have the answer. It's like, it is sometimes a little frustrating to hear the media, you know, and look at, we have the answers. They are just there. Like T1 stayed 2.5 years. And they didn't leave. Like they knew they had it in themselves that they could become the best team in the world. And it took them 2.5 years. And to this day, they still struggle to Gen G because, yeah, if you play to your strengths, sometimes you're going to find someone that's good against you. You can ask a certain sportman called Roger Federer how much he likes playing on clay against Rafael Nadal. Because if it wasn't for Nadal, Roger Federer would be pretty, you know, he would be pretty, like his trophy case would be the biggest of the history of his sports. But there was this guy that somehow played perfectly on his weaknesses. And it was so hard for him because physically, he was just better mentally. Like, Federer was able to break the spirit of anyone because there was this flashy move that you're like, he's unbeatable. And there was this young guy that would just run after them and just bring them back and back and back. And Nadal kind of broke Federer's spirit eventually, you know, by beating him even at Wimbledon and stuff, meaning that playing towards your strength means that you're not going to be like S+ in every single compartment of your game, but you might become world champion. If you try to be, you know, good at everything, you become Mario. You know, in all the sports games from Nintendo, Mario is like the 5 out of 10
Mm.
in everything. This is the at best, if everything goes right and you work the hardest you can and you try to become good at everything, you'll become Mario. But you never win the trophy.
There's a quote that I actually tweeted about yesterday. That's why it's on my mind, which I got from a book called Win Forever. But it's Jerry Garcia saying, I think he was asked at one point, he's the lead guitarist for the Grateful Dead or something. He might have been asked, like, how does it feel to be part of one of the greatest rock bands of all time? And he said, we don't want to be the greatest doing something. We want to be the only ones doing it. And I just love that, like, as an approach. I'd much rather be on a team that could come first and could come 10th than a team that's going to come 5th.
That's Cruyff that was saying, oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
Mentioning Johan Cruyff, you know, the
footballer.
Rest in peace, football coach, former player of Ajax of Amsterdam. I think it's Ajax. We say it Ajax in French. The total football. And he said, when you lose trying to play the best possible game, people make fun of you. But the day you'll win the heart of everyone. And that's the thing, is like, even the people that hate Barcelona, what do you have to say about 2008 Barcelona? What do you have to say? It's like, yeah, you watch it, it's just perfect. It's just like, yeah, it's like, this is the way the game is meant to be played. When you see T1 playing the quarterfinal game 2 against LNG, when the first time they do Arch Varus and they execute it perfectly, this is the way the game is meant to be played. Like, the peak comps are the strongest in the game, naturally, like theoretically. They're just the hardest to execute. Like, very few teams in the world can execute peak comps. But they will beat the team fight, they will beat everything. So if you're able to bring your own craft to a level where you can be champion, not only you win the trophy, but you win the heart of the fans. Trying to play what everybody does is like, when you win, no, it's forgettable. Like, I'm asking you, do you remember the very good and defined playstyle of Rogue when they became champion of LEC?
No, I don't think so, off the top of my head.
Because they're 3-0 G2. That's a pretty historic it's a pretty historic moment in the history of LEC. Like, do you remember? Like, if I ask you how was playing G2 in 2019 or 2018,
that I can remember.
If I ask you how was playing Origin in 2015, you can probably ask me which were the champions that Neil and Miffy were playing in 2015, right? Like the Kalista. Because you bring something to a level where everybody speaks about it. To this day, you know that Caps on Silas is great. You know, VTO on Akali is great. You know, some players, like I remember sorry, I'm talking way too much.
No, go.
There was this team from NA with Huni and Damonte that played Kiana and Rumble. And they went to Worlds with Kiana Rumble all the time. And they were the only one playing it. And I feel like that's the thing, is just do your thing and it's gonna be all right.
I mean, G2 was the most successful Western team ever, that version of G2, where you had no idea what they were going to do, and they were going to do it. You know, there was a few times, like early on when we were scrimming them, they used to do things like, I mean, even in the 5th game, they used to play different roles. You know, I mean, against us, Perks always wanted to play top because we had Expect, and they always have this constant back and forth, and they would play weird champions everywhere, and people would think like, oh, it's just BM or stuff like that, and then they come to stage and they're just playing like they're playing their way, they're playing their champions in every position, and that was you'd think that would be a blueprint to not success, but at least some confidence in going your own way. But it's like you said, you know, if T1 are in the West, they lose to Gen.G, who are good against their style, then they change their style. Then they play what Gen.G is playing, or they go and just play whatever, just as like you said, the 55% champs from solo queue. And suddenly you don't beat anyone else, or you beat half the teams and you're just chilling in the middle.
I'm trying to make the mental trick of thinking about all the champions that were troll and how many of them eventually stayed legit, if it's more in favor of like staying legit or if it's more like getting into the trash. When I look at Adam, you know, gods like Olaf troll pick wasn't like eventually became a thing. Garen became a thing. Darius became a thing. there is probably other picks that I'm thinking about that like people were thinking it's troll. I still think to this day, like Teemo, for instance, I'm pretty sure a team one day will just gonna get Teemo and just smash everyone else because having like 600 damage shrooms everywhere on the map in competitive is probably the biggest nightmare of every single professional player. Like knowing that you need 4 sweepers and they do Baron and there is like mushrooms everywhere. So I'm very, very, very confident on this. It's we've really scraped 3% of the game, like 3 or 4%.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, even you can even
Lissandra
see...
support.
Yeah, exactly.
Really good, excellent support, and he was troll. People thought he was a troll. The double headchatter, the Senna Sona, the Seraphine Sona has to come back. Super broken. The Taric Mastery, we don't do it anymore. I'm pretty sure it's still viable. There is so many things that we've seen over the years, counter picks, very good ideas, builds that everybody considered troll, that if you actually have the mindset of sitting down with your players and trying it, look at the Fiddlestick top.
Yeah, that's why it's so good that Merwin's in the league. You know, he's actually just going to be... I was so happy. I always used to use this example, and luckily, you know, Striker was letting, or whoever on BDS was letting Adam play his champs, and Mad Lions, they're letting Merwin play his champs. But I always use this example is that if Doinby was just as good as he is and just as good as he became, but was in the ERL system, he would not have ever made it. Because when he first came into the meta, it was like pre-rework Pantheon, Cho'Gath mid. He's not allowed to play that. If EU LCS didn't play it, you were not allowed to play it. And that came from coaches. And the other thing, tying it back, you know, with what G2 are doing this year, which I think is really, really good, is they're integrating the draft with these specific systems or specific ways that they're playing the game. So it's not Lissandra support just because it's good into Rakan. And in solo queue, we found her that it beats Rakan or whatever it might be. But it's because they draft Lissandra on 4-5, but they've already got 5 champions that all want to dive on someone and just press R. And then, like, who is better than that? Who is better than Lissandra at that? You know, like, that's the perfect way to start. And they know that it's going to be one of their options, but it's not just in isolation. It's within that whole system that they've created of how their draft works. And that's why I think so many of the picks would have been... I mean, they had Fiddle in the jungle against Ivan, which in the game didn't work. But again, it was with, like, Kled and Tristana and all this stuff that wants to just, like, jump forward. They're not playing... I don't know, Fiddlesticks and a bunch of long-range champions. They already have their system. Yeah, so they've already got the system, which then means they can be a lot more creative around it. And so the other thing that people say sometimes as a downside to systems is like, well, you're just going to like follow a step by step and then there's no creativity. And it's the opposite in practice because unless I guess you could probably make a system that is very step by step, but in practice, they're going to be to give everyone clarity and actually ends up giving people more space because it's not like you can just do anything. We've got this specific box, but within this specific box, you can be much more creative.
Yeah, I mean, because I feel like people do have a very narrow approach to champions in this game in general. Like, he's picking Azir, I'm picking that. Oh, they have Xayah, I'm gonna pick that. Well, like, what's good in just in lane, you know? I feel like there are matchups that, yeah, you will lose the game because you're under your turret and then you're just gonna get dove. So priority means a lot. Like, you cannot play any champion to any champion. Like, if people understood what we're saying that way, I just want to disclaimer, no, there is a lot of champions that are immediately dismissed because they will lose. Like, you cannot just pick Kassadin and say, oh yeah, it's good against mages. No, you can't. Like, you're gonna lose the game because Kassadin's not a champion. But there is plenty of strategies that are very strong and just people forget about them because there is too much data. I want to see, for instance, there is a champ that's totally broken. I always say that if this champion is viable, is broken, it's Braum. Braum is like a stun on an auto attack. If you have people auto attacking, plus the shield, the value of the shield in mid game is probably like 6k HP. So if you compare that into goal, like Braum just prints money all the time whenever he presses E. But I haven't seen a team, and I would like to see SK do that. It's pick Braum, even in a bad matchup, but force invade level 1 with the new jungle, and split the map with like a jungle that can dive and really play toward that bot lane. That's something, when in my head I'm like, if SK played that way, and if they prepared that against G2 and they forced G2 out of their bot side and they dove G2, even though they would lose the game, I would be like, SK is on track to become a top team. I'm waiting for this type of things because I believe that I would say out of 10 teams, probably 4 are good at playing the meta. Not more. There is 6 teams that need to reinvent themselves and 4 that, like, for instance, Vitality will always be good in front to back. You give them a control mage mid, you give them a top tank top, Kazi Hisseng, give them engage and long range ADC. You wait for 25 minutes. If they didn't lose in 25 minutes, you can go grab a coffee, the team has won. If you give that to SK, same thing, but the other way.
Yeah,
we'll just lose.
I think you're right. I'm trying to think of sort of other reasons, but it does all just come back to this being scared to try it and the doubt and that sort of thing, which when the pressure is so high and when the turnaround is so short, everyone's trying to like justify their position in every single situation and all that kind of thing. I'm trying to think of where to go because there's so many things that I want to talk about. I guess this sort of ties into one of the things that I wanted to ask you. Firstly, do you think that the LEC has actually been really weak in the last, this year and last year? Do you think the standard is not that high?
It's really, I really hate saying it because I feel, I know some players listen to what I say. And I have so much respect for the pro players. They really annoy me, I've openly criticized players for some of their behaviors, which I don't really... I don't blame them because, I mean, as I said, they've been raised into a system that lead them into behaving the way they do. Like, they're not mean, they're not... Most of the players really do at least they feel like they do everything they can and they really invest a lot of their energy into their craft. So I have mad respect. But I have to say, like, the level overall of the league was bad. But that's more the fault to... we were speaking about NA injecting a lot of money and then becoming bad. I feel like when the salaries become that high and there is so much friction around transfers, you can't really have good teams. That's the reality of it. I think that out of the 10 teams in LEC, probably 1 or 2 are playing with the 5 players they really want to play with. I think, for instance, SK should be pretty content. Like, if you're a middle-sized budget, you're ready to pay for one very, very good player, like a big salary, and around him, you want players that are going to be more serviceable and create a more simple, predictable game plan, but try to give a staff to refine it to the purest level and try to get away with it. I think SK, for instance, you would be very happy with it. I think that Heretics is probably paying a lot of money for what they have. I think that 5 rookies would probably be in the middle of the pack. Proof is Mad Lions is doing it. So you probably don't need to have the biggest veteran of the league. And the reason for this is just in EU, everybody's trying to take the throne of G2 by fighting against... Like, it's very weird. It's a very weird dynamic where G2 is the king, and then there is this kind of Game of Thrones war in between all the other teams that shoot themselves in the feet instead of like transferring players and stuff. I do understand why. It's like, oh, I have Humanoid, I don't want to sell him for like cheap because I pay him a lot, or I don't want to pay all these like veteran, very superstar players. But truth is, I'm pretty sure that no team is playing with the players they really like. If you ask most of the team and the staff is like, which team would you like to have? They will tell me just like, I want the 5 players of G2. Nobody will be like, oh, I know exactly like a team that will be G2, like would look like that. And even if they know, they can't buy it. Nobody's gonna sell it. It's gonna be like, oh, you think Elyoya is the best support? Okay, give me that much. It's like, oh, I can't pay that. I mean, you go in ERL and you have to find someone that's as good as Elyoya. But people like Elyoya, you find them every 2-3 years. There was Yike. Okay, G2 got it. Now who? So you have all these new guys that are like fillers on team that don't want to spend the money, and the team that still have investment and want to spend the money, they actually buy the players based on what they did and not what they are. Speaking, for instance, about Perks, a player that I immensely respect, but as I said in my content, Perks was the best mid laner in LEC in 2017. It was 7 years ago. Like the last time you could officially say absolutely nobody is in discussion for best mid in LEC was 2017, because Caps wasn't like, it was the first year of Caps and he was not as good. Then he took the lead in 2018, and from 2018 I think there is a pretty big consensus around Caps being the best player. But it means that this player that still like I think he's more expensive than I don't know, most of the players in Europe, is not the best player. He's probably the most expensive mid, or he has been the most expensive, but he was not even the best player. So it means that the values of the market and the reality of what's happening with the players after, there is a big mismatch. And the people who spend the money are actually being praised for spending the money, but they don't really face the responsibilities because they're owners. So you end up in situations where the fans are going to be like, oh, you bought all these superstars for me. Thank you so much. We love you. Oh, this is the best team. They said the jerseys and stuff. And then you have a kind of a Lookwater project that lasts a year and a half, and then you sell these players at like a lower value, and you just burnt a lot of cash. You don't really know where to build from what you've done, and then the fans are disappointed. And because you need to satisfy your fans, because that's the only way you can get like revenue, you just buy new players. And this creates terrible projects. Like Vitality for the last 2 years, it is very hard to defend the project, as much as, today I think they've made a lot of very good choice this year, and they've improved, like they're in very good direction. The last 2 years of Vitality, what will save, like, how do you want to save this project? Sorry, I spoke a lot again.
No, it's good. I mean, I want to be clear, like I do think actually the LEC has been incredibly weak the last year and a bit, but I don't think it's the players' fault at all. I also don't think we've just all got individually worse, in the region. Like, I refuse to believe that. Of course, more LPL, LCK teams going to Worlds, etc. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about just eyes, like how the teams are playing. And I don't put any blame, well, not any blame on the players. I don't know enough to say that. But I think there's so many of the things around the league, in the coaching and in the management and the organizations, that have been just really, really counterproductive, and in like really short-term thinking. One of the examples, I will probably get the numbers wrong, but hopefully the point still stands. One of the examples that I use in terms of how short-term we've been thinking in the West is the Shy is Korean, despite playing his whole career in China, and he was brought over when he was like 14 or something, or 13, 14 to play at IG, and then when he was 17 he was able to be put in, and already that's like impressive. Okay, you're thinking a few years in advance, but if you actually think about that and you look at the times, it's like in 2014 they do that, and then 3 years later he's playing 2017, they win Worlds, or whatever year it was,
2018.
But the point is like that level of thinking 3 or 4 years in the future was happening so long ago, and yet we're still really stuck with this idea of basically how can we do the best this year, and then how can we do the best next year. And I think it kind of comes back to the systems again. Like, we talked about systems in the game, but whether you call it strategy or just proper long-term thinking, or the systems around coaching, which I think, one of the things that
culture.
Yeah.
The word that I use is culture, because
Okay.
I think different clubs have different culture. I think, for instance, the best club in the whole EU in the last 6 years was LDLC in LFL. Because if you look at LDLC track record, they've had most of the top tier player at their position, or runner-up for the throne at every single position. And all the players that went into LEC, I would say 85% of them are still there playing, and they are like considered pretty well respected. I think now Casey has taken I think that Kamel and his staff are doing a very good job. When you see like Vladi, you see Calist is like a prodigy. I think this guy is actually has it all. He's already more impressive than half of the ADCs that I see in LEC at the current moment. And it's kind of unfortunate that Casey had to make the choice of upset, which I think is kind of breaks the balance of their roster. But yeah, it's LDLC. They had Yike, they had Eika, they had Vitio, they had White, they had Zoelis, they had Exakik, they had DOS, they had Ragnar, and I think this guy is gonna go up in LEC at some point. So proper scouting and investment on the long term is gonna give you a lot of value. Right now, if you look at Mad Lion, they won titles with just good scouting. It takes you places. The only thing you need to do is just accept that sometimes you're just gonna be hard 10th. BDS built on it. No, they're runner-up for the title. Vitality 2019-2020 decided to go with rookies. After 2 bad splits, they were like, nope. Call the investor, bought all the superstars, and this year they started a rebuild. For 4 years later, $1 million spent. Now they're just starting where they started in 2019, which is like, oh, what are the good players? And still, like they don't have a lot of players they can build for the future, because Photon is still a player that will probably like eventually leave. They have VTO that's young, but Douglas and VTO are young, but Karzi and Helisong are more on the late stage of their career. Karzi is still young, I think.
Yeah, he's still really young.
There is this thing of I mean, Mac, I think, have like firmly believe in these players, so that's what comforts me, and I think that they can grow from there. But I hope that at the end of the year, if Vitality doesn't do a really good year, but even a decent year, they keep 3 players, maybe 4, and they're like, yeah, I think we just need to change 1 player because these players naturally just don't fit, and we need one more system, so probably a different player. But if you look at the player market, this is exactly the opposite that's happening. The identity of Rogue has changed 4 times. I'm not even speaking about Astralis, XL, SK. No, it's good, but hasn't been the case. Fnatic is a shame that the second best organization in the league has had to make 3 player changes last year to become the team it was. Meaning, and they went with Reckless, a player that had a very poor showing in LFL. That wasn't really intended. I didn't feel like Casey really like thrive with Casey with Reckless, and they still went with him, and eventually like left. And it's because Rogue, for some magical reason, decided to part ways with Streamby, that they had the chance to actually get him instead of Advien, because with Advien it would probably not have been the team. So that really clearly shows, right? The facts are proving that organization in LEC, either they don't know, right? There is 2 choices when something is wrong. It's either you don't have the competence, or you don't want to exert your competence, right? You have other reasons, you have another agenda than to execute your competence. And that's why I think that's the biggest reason that the LEC is bad, because I think their players are doing their best, but they're not playing with players they want to play with. I don't think that the teams have the player they want to coach. I don't think the coaches have the teams they want to play. So all of this creates a very poor ecosystem where nobody's performing at even 70% of their potential.
And I think that if you think, as a focus on the coaching, because obviously that's what I can speak to the most, I think because we mentioned before, so much of coaching is the analysis part and the systems around the game and the systems around it within an organization of how we're going to approach practice, how we're going to approach off-season, how all that kind of thing is something that needs even more time to build, and if you're going to be every year, you're going to be sort of burning it all down and starting again, then you're never going to progress. You're going to, you've been in the LEC for 4 years as an organization, or whatever it is, 6 years now since it started. But is it 6 years, or is it 1 year 6 times? And for most teams, it's actually been the latter rather than the former. And I think because we're not thinking like that, we're just the thing with this kind of like systematic approach to things is that in a way, even if you're not consciously talking about it or consciously thinking about it, you are repeating behaviors and you are like implicitly doing these kind of things. And then, but if you can't articulate them, you can't firstly defend them. So that's why we're talking about champions, and people suddenly they can't defend why they're playing this champion, and so it falls away because one game it went badly. But also when things change, you just kept doing what you were doing because you didn't really know why you were doing it, and so now it's all different. And I think one of the big things, I've heard a few people talk about the format being not good for high performance, and I think that's just nonsense. I think that this, you drop the word like high performance, so it sounds a bit better than than it would otherwise. But if the way that we're approaching it is the same as when the format was different, then it's never going to be as productive, because the way that we approached practice, the way that we approached a whole season was based around a long league where you had a lot of time to get better and you had 2 days a week of games. And so I hear people saying this format's bad for high performance, but also we can't practice the year before, and also we can't practice on game days, and also we just approach scrims in the same way as before. Then of course it's not going to be as productive. That's like the game completely changes and we approach it in the same way, then that's the same sort of stagnation, but just from the coaching side of things. And so I think that also ties with everything. It's like the organizations don't have specific goals that they're aiming for in the long term and reasons for those goals that are clearly articulated and laid out to everybody. And therefore the coaches really struggle with making that kind of thing. And therefore the whole thing it kind of stagnates.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a cascading from, I think that's the good organizations, the one that will eventually get success. Like they have setbacks, but and that's a vision. I think you can find recording of me saying it like 2017. It's from the investor to the assistant coach or the data analyst. Everybody shares the same vision. Because the investor is bringing the money to buy the players, but he needs to understand that the sports never guarantees wins. And so instead of just buying the player, it should be kind of a combined effort from the top management to define what type of culture and what type of identity the club wants. If you're SK, you probably don't have the same objectives as G2, and it's perfectly fine. Not every sports league needs to have 10 leaders. If you're Fnatic, for instance, you need to aim for the win. And then the difference is, for instance, G2 has this culture of, we'll deliver the best possible level of performance, but no matter what happens, we'll loaf about it. That's how I will summarize G2. But that's the culture. It's like, we'll put everything that we can to get even 1% chance more to get the biggest trophy, and we'll go for every single win, get the best players. We will make them work harder than anyone with the best staff. But no matter what happens, we'll laugh about it. If you look at a lot of these teams, you know that top to bottom, there is not a single ID that's shared between the people who bring the money, the people who administrate the structure, the people who do the recruitment of the coaching staff, the decision of these people with the coaching staff about the players they want, and then the decision, because then all of this aligns. You want these players because you want this culture, so you get that much money to execute on that many years, and you accept that many setbacks. If you want to win day one, year one, and you want to be the best at everything, you probably need to spend 10 or 15 times more money, and it's not even guaranteed. So for this reason, you clearly see that the LEC, and I think the West in general, is it's just one of the stigma of how poorly us as an industry have managed our small, very entertainment that we decided to transform into an industry. Because with this short term injection of a lot of money and this massive inflation of revenue, fictional revenue because it's coming from investors, not from organic money, the main strategy of most of the economic agents involved into esports is to maximize their short-term profit. And you can't create performance with that. That's just not, it is an objective. It's a performance in itself. Like everybody's doing the best performance for themselves. But as I would say a global region, I would say the West, we're all failing because the only thing we do is maximize our own income by and excusing the poor performances by saying that we are following the data, therefore we can't be, and the data is pretty much Korea and China. So the industry cannot really go and grow, and people will put that into franchise and stuff. I think this is a whole industry. I don't want to put, people would try to point fingers. It's not the players that are lazy. It's not the coaches that are bad. It's not the owners that are stupid. It's not the investors that are like that like don't want to spend money. It's not a Riot that made a poor system. It's all of us. We are failing, and we can clearly see that the outcome, because the Western leagues, in terms of appeal, are lowering. If it wasn't for this influencer team that bring massive amount of fans, which is once again more synthetical approach, like a outcome than an organic growth, right? I think we would be already cornered the way LCS is, and the reason, the main reason for it is, I think that in general the esport game has been dominated by short-term income instead of long-term performance.
And I mean, you mentioned there that SK doesn't have the same goal as G2. I think maybe SK is actually one of the examples that is, I would definitely agree with. But I think also some of the problem is that a lot of teams do have the same goal when they shouldn't, in a way. And I think it's mostly due to the fact that it's not talked about and it's not explicit. But I would say that most teams tell themselves that they're trying to win. There's an example, because they released it in their own content from last year when XL, they came 10th and then they came 10th. And in their own content coming into the first week of the next season, they were saying they were playing against something like, I don't know, G2, Vitality, who were the revamped Vitality, who everyone said were just absolutely rolling everyone in scrims, and SK, who had just come 8th or something. And they said literally in the video that they released, they said, we didn't prep at all for SK. Like we didn't even look at SK. We were looking at G2 to prep against G2. And I get it. Like it feels good to beat the top team. But if you've come 10th twice, you can't come into the season thinking our goal is to win. Like you have to be realistic, and you have to be a bit more adult about it.
Let's be real. Like this is a terrible culture. Like for instance, I think Carmine has a good culture because I think the owner of Carmine is a guy that actually cares a lot. Like Kamel cares. I mean, you've been in LFL. You were coaching Solari back then, so you've faced it. But Carmine is still trying to bring something. And I had a lot of arguments with the Carmine fan base because they have the que la win, only the win, right? Which I think is a terrible thing because they started winning. So they were like, oh, we're winning, so we're going to promise this all the time, which is terrible. I've said that openly. I know like fans were like, you don't go into a competition to be 7th. No, you go in competition to do your best. And your culture should be how you work, what you put in place, what you have to tell your fan, and what's the story underlying. And the truth is, I was right because they're 10th and Kamel has 150k viewer on his stream. They're coming to watch a loss. They don't care because the story of Carmine has never been about the win. The story of Carmine is the dream of a kid that comes from the poor suburbs of France and followed his passion, became an influencer, through video games created an audience and decided to actually transfer most of the asset he had in terms of influence into a risky project, which is an esports team, and bring all of the people that follow him into his childhood dream. This is way better than winning. This story is a million times more compelling. This is literally a story of a shonen that everybody would watch on the TV. If it was fictional, everybody was like, that's a great story. And versus that, you have, oh, we win. So que la win doesn't exist. And I think that most of these teams, they should not look at this. The problem you have is the only team that had the chance to separate themselves from the win is G2, which is we're going to try to win, but if we don't win, we loaf. And we was like, oh, we're going to do something super funny where we're going to come and if we lose, we're going to make fun of ourselves. That's what Excel did, for instance. But that's not as funny because it's already taken. Where is the team that's goofy? Where is the team that's funny? Where is the team that's serious? Where is the team where you work more than anywhere else? Where's the team that develop the rookies, sell them, doesn't matter, just goes long term and makes money out of this? Like, if your team has an identity, people will follow the story, get along, follow you, because that's the same thing with corporations. People buy your product for the story, you sell them. That's why people pay millions in marketing. Coca-Cola doesn't sell you like, oh, we have a very good taste of the Coca-Cola. They bring you a story. They have to sell it to you. What's the story of Rogue? The team that Koi didn't want anymore? Is it like, what's the story of Giantix? It's XL, the British team that became suddenly Spanish.
Yeah.
So there is a huge work to be done, kind of a Marshall Plan of esports, I think, that overcomes the discussion of the LEC. But people who are in charge now need to realize that it's not done. There is plenty of things that you can do from like right now and start build on your players to build something that's beautiful for your fans. Last example, and then I give you the speech. BDS has a lot of money, right? It's everybody knows that BDS is a wealthy organization. Look at their players. Do you think they have an expensive roster? Do you think this roster is very expensive? Probably not. They started with rookies. They kept them. They upgraded them. They found the stuff they wanted. Now they're like second best, and they still haven't spent a lot of money. Meaning that it's not because you have money that you even have to spend it. And that's the beauty of esports, and that's the beauty of sports. Is you can, with the story, you can carry on with for years without having to ever spend the money. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward for the future. And yeah, right now it's kind of the opposite. So that's why the LEC is not in a good spot.
Mm. I mean, I think that the thing with KC, like, is such a good point, and you can see, I think, with League of Legends more than ever. I would say, I mean, I've got a background in videos, so I'm definitely biased, but I would say people watch sport mostly for the stories anyway. You can see since Drive to Survive came out, loads more people watch F1, and they watch it because suddenly you care about the players or the drivers. And in a game like League of Legends, you're not even seeing them play, you know, you're watching the map. So if you just cared about the best, I'm only watching the LEC because it's the best League of Legends. It's like, well, it's not. You can watch the LPL, you can watch the LCK, or even if you look at the LFL, you know, like there's more people watch the LFL than watch the LCS. And it's just when you're saying that, when you know, even now when you're talking about Kometo stories, like I'm getting goosebumps, you know. You've never had goosebumps from someone saying, hey, we're going to win, and then we're going to we'll try and win.
After winning, we'll win more.
Yeah.
And after the win, we'll win more. Like, only one team can have this. That's the privilege on only one team. And the only team that can say, but we win, is T1. But it's a secured spot. Like, it's already done. They have the storyline. They have the logo. They have the legacy. They have the trophy case. They have the best player in history. That's okay. They have it. Like, once in every, you know, and once in every sport, you have the Jordan of Bulls, the Bulls of Jordan, sorry. You have, you know, and that creates kind of a legacy for your club. But if you don't have this, you don't have to pretend. Just write a simple thing on what you think it makes you cool, and just do everything around it, and people will love it.
And stick to it. I think people have tried, and then again, like with the draft, they try for one split to do something a bit different, and then it doesn't instantly work. But it's never going to instantly work because you get better at it the more you do it as well.
G2 wasn't like that in the beginning.
Yeah.
G2 was
much more serious.
People, I think people have a very short memory. I don't blame them. I think it's very hard in esports to have a memory because everything happens so fast. But G2 took such a long time to find its identity because it was just it was the runner-up of Fnatic for the longest time. Then they came and they triumphed as the best team in Europe. And then they had all this international failure. They were ridiculous. And I think they started making fun of themselves when they were losing internationally. They were like, we are trying, but we can't. So we're just probably just going to make fun of it. And they kind of transitioned that locally, and they became a team that's very good. Just everybody likes G2. You can't hate on G2. Why? Because it's just fun. You see a G2 post, they lost. Oh, it's fun. Like you probably like, you breathe some air through your nose watching your phone. You're like, oh, G2, you know, their social media people are really good. Yeah, I think Mad, for instance, in that regard, has brought so much excitement. Like, I love what my Mad is doing right now. It's like, I'm French. There is this rivalry between French and Spanish, but God, I love Mad so much. I love them. They're phenomenal. Like, Frescovi, Eloya, Mirwin, just this top side plays anything, all the play styles. Very aggressive, brings the banter, doesn't hesitate to go super hard on their opponent on Twitter. just keep doing that, please. That's exactly what we need.
And don't, if they get knocked out next round, like, I don't care, like, do the same again, please. Like, just keep up the
Come
same.
and banter us like, oh yeah, we were bad last split, but this time
Yeah.
we're gonna pick something that's even weirder, and you guys are not gonna be surprised. And when we lose, we're gonna make fun of you, and everybody's gonna be like, yeah, this mad game, I want to watch it because what are they cooking? And it becomes very fun. I think that's the. I really hope that at some point people will realize that it's just a matter of assembling 5 players that want to play together, having some good systems, having some story to tell to the people, and sticking to it for 2 or 3 years until success happens.
And all that, you all come aligned behind that goal and behind that story, and that's where it all just kind of leads from.
Yeah.
One of the other things, we'll go off the LEC. I'm glad we ended on a bit more of a positive note, because I was thinking we need to try and get it a bit more positive. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, because obviously you're very involved in the LFL, why do you think that the LFL has been so strong and is still so strong in general, even when, I know KC won last time, of course, but when I first joined the LFL was at that moment where KC would kind of still very new, and there was an off season where very early on, I think maybe even the first off season after I'd already been coaching here, where it was like, this person's joining the LFL, this person, and it just suddenly got so incredibly stacked. And there was a few years where at EMEA Masters, it was like 3 out of 4 of the semi-finalists were LFL, but then that actually hasn't happened last year. And yet I think most people would still say the average of the LFL is still so high. Like we saw TDS get the first win yesterday. Like every team can actually genuinely beat every other team. It seems like there's not games that are sort of, well, 3 wins is a bit of a derogatory way to say it. But
there is no Plon or MCES anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
No.
How do you think?
Insult.
How do you think that the average is still so high, considering it was 3 out of 4 were Prime League or whatever last EMEA Masters or the one before, I should say. And it's not been necessarily like the best teams at the top, but just the average has still been so good and the viewership so good, and it still sort of feels exciting and feels like it's growing. What would you kind of attribute all that to?
It's not a nice answer, but I think it's kind of luck that KC came and won at the same time that the former broadcast came new with OTP. I think that we had a phenomenal French generation of talent that we sent to the LEC, showing that the region was strong. And when everybody wants to go somewhere, the price rise. It's kind of bid and ask. It's kind of, because it's the only league aside of LEC in Europe that actually gets legit traction. Like, people will really watch it. Like, it's a major league. It has become kind of a retirement house for a lot of LEC player that can't perform anymore in LEC. And I think that the level, for instance, of LFL, I've called that 2.5 years ago, and I think it's just gonna go down until like in the new best league is gonna be LVP or Prime League, because we're getting players that we know won't improve anymore. And I think that's the worst thing. Like, if I look at mids, I think Chocolate has proved that he's still improving. He's still like in this kind of middle ground between LEC and LFL. But I don't like Fabivan, DK, I think Shayek, Eika. I put it aside because I think this guy has like the saddest career ever. Like, I think this guy has the level to play in LEC since a lot of time. But there is so many players that I see and I'm like, yeah, they just got demoted. And I think a league where it looks strong because there is a lot of names we know, but I think it's not healthy for a league that 30 or 40% of the players are already named that we know the value of. Like, a league that's strong is a league that's consistently every year sending 3, 4, 5 players in LEC and like are the top standing. So we had the generation before when the LFL was really strong, and thanks to this generation that was so strong, now we are getting because there is a delay, right? So at T equals 0, we have very good LFL players, and the LFL is the strongest ERL by far. This Then we send our players to the LEC and we get all the traction, knowing that everybody else in Europe wants to play in LFL because we have traction, thanks to KC and all the external parameters. So now we get, I would say, middle-level players that will not probably play in G2 next years when we still have the traction. But after 2, 3, 4 iterations of having degraded players, I would say like just benched player from LEC, sorry for the word, I want to find better way of speaking, but my English is bad tonight. I think we're gonna go worse and worse and worse in LFL. I don't think that, for instance, Tinks is a young, promising rookie that will play in G2 in 2 years. I think that Tinks is probably the best out-of-the-box jungle that Team du Sud could afford to actually run a project against all the teams that are actually doing the same thing. But we do not have as many, and we still have a lot of very good French talent, but we don't have as many as we used to. And I'm a little worried about having Ricker, Tinks, Febiven, Selfmade, Shayek, Jesus. The list starts to extend, and that doesn't. I explained the success, but I don't think the strength is here anymore.
And again, it maybe comes back to the fear part of things, where if you think the league is so strong that you think you have to get someone that's already complete, because if it doesn't work, you can kind of get demoted as well.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, that's the thing is sports has a very elegant way to force you to go big or go home, no matter what you aim for. Even if you're just trying to maintain in LFL, the only way you will maintain long term is if you don't have to overpay for LEC talents and you actually breed your own talents and you develop them and you have a culture. That's what KC did, and now they're still good. They're attractive. People want to play for KC. I think, for instance, some other orgs have a very hard time recruiting. I think GameWard, for instance, is very hard because they had a bad year. No, they are not as hype as the way they were like 2 or 3 years ago when they were a new team, and people are like, why would you play for GameWard? So you have to spend a lot of money, and you get other former players, and older players will never, like, what are you gonna do if you're GameWard? You keep paying and still back that didn't succeed in Solari last year that much for the next 3 years, 4 years. No, you're gonna have to get people from Division 2 and stuff. So you should already do that, risking to probably go back in Division 2, but you're just wasting time and money. So sports forces you to, anyway, no matter what your project is, go 100% into it. Otherwise, you just have an aftershock that's way worse, but later on.
Yeah, and it comes back to the short-term thinking again. If you're thinking about just this year, maybe it's the best. But as soon as you think, well, okay, we'll get demoted in 2 years having spent loads of money, or we try to actually build something new and build something exciting, it kind of feeds to everything else. You mentioned Eika briefly. I mean, I'm obviously nowhere near as familiar with him and his whole career as you, but he's definitely someone where if I was to ask you, why do you think Eika is not in the LEC? I mean, we're talking about champions as well. There's AP Zeri or the Cogmore with the new what's called Malignance, or that old item recently. Yeah. If we want some more diversity in champions in the LEC, that would also be a good place to start. But why do you think?
I think there is a stigma around age, and a lot of players will tell you that some of their counterparts, haven't performed there where they want. But I think that Eika has been the best performing mid with Seiken, and I would say to some extent Chocolate last year, of the whole ERL system. Like, I have a very hard time, when I see Ricker doing a first year, and I mean, he got replaced by Niski, but there was a Chayek or Chocolate at Excel, and he got replaced by Nuke Duck.
Chocolate, yeah.
And it's irritating to see that the name of Eika is never dropped, because I worked with him. I don't think he has it all. Like, I don't think he has all the skills, and he would become the best mid laner in LEC. But I think there are teams. I mean, right now I think the mids in LEC are pretty good, but there were years where I think I saw definitely like 1 or 2 slots and was like, you really just don't want Eika because you don't want Eika, right? It's like because he's always been there. So he keeps being the best performing mid in LFL every single year. by kind of some margin, picks a lot of very interesting picks. Is known to be one of the best teammates in the league. Is probably not the most expensive player you can get. So tell me why you wouldn't get him. In LCS or LEC, Eika should have been as much of a no-brainer as most of... Imagine Eika right now playing in mid for Bo in KC instead of Seiken, who's not a specialist at playing for his jungle. Eika is literally just I would say a slightly worse Niski. But Eika does everything that Niski does, Eika can do. So you will have Bo and Eika, you will have a thriving mid jungle. But you have Seiken that has to kind of likes to have a jungle that calls for him, and he plays with Bo. Bo is very vocal, but I think like the communication doesn't go exactly the same way as he was with Syncroft. And you see all these things, it's very infuriating for Eika because he is factually the best ERL player or the second or third best ERL player at his position since 3 years, and nobody picks him just because he played in Elements 5 years ago. Therefore, he can't play, and that's completely fucking stupid.
Yeah, he needs a name change, and then he'll get a shot.
Yeah. It's just called Bob or something.
Yeah.
Oh, who's this guy Bob that has the best KD in NFL? We need to get him. Oh, it's Eika. No, guys, he's too old.
It's crazy. Okay, I'll try and gradually sort of wrap things up as we've gone 2 hours already.
I knew it would be a long episode.
Yeah, this is always, it's never because I run out of things to talk about. It's always because I start to get tired and I find myself losing focus and bouncing all over the place. But I'd like to end with the quickfire questions, same as I ask everybody. So first one is, who are the coaches that you look up to? Actually, I'll change this to just people. Every time I say it, I should change it to people. Who are the people that you look up to or idolize either now or earlier on in your career?
It's a very, very hard question. I'd say I think Faker is someone that I respect a lot because I've never been a Faker fan. Never been. There's never been. I was always rooting for the antagonist. So I've been for Pound. I've been for all of these guys. I think that being able to, there is this poem from Rudyard Kipling. You'll become a man, my son. And it's like, if you can meet victory after defeat and treat these two liars from the same... I don't remember exactly because I know it in French.
Yeah.
I think that Faker has ascended to a level where I think the result doesn't matter anymore. Like, this ideal thing where you're like Kobe Bryant was like, I just want to become better at basketball. Therefore, I have to compete at the highest level to understand the game at the core. I think that Faker has ascended to a level where we thought he would retire way earlier. I think it's not even the result that impressed me, it's the relationship to retirement as an old player that has achieved everything. And you see that it is just a curiosity about how far he can push the game with like his teammates. And it's not about performing anymore. Like, he didn't explode in joy when he won Worlds. He was very composed, but very happy. You see that inside there was a lot of emotion. And I think that being able to make this synthesis of a lifetime of competition, very few athletes will reach a level of excellence where they can become... You see all these greatest of the greatest in sports, they are at peace. At the end of their career, you look at Federer, Nadal, Jordan, they're at peace. They accept that it wraps up and comes to an end, but with a very big... The commitment is still there, but the detachment to what happens in such a short-term industry inspires me so much. So I have a lot of respect for Faker. And if I have to pick someone from Europe, I will probably pick... Yonkos. There is plenty of flaws about Yonkos. But if I think about Europe, he is more the face of the LEC than Caps, than XPK, than SOAS, than Yellowstar. The guy that faced them all since the very beginning, that's still there, brings smiles to everyone, every single desk, every single interview is a banter, streams are a banger, he's nice, he doesn't play as well as he used to, but man, I really respect. Like, I've done 2.5 years in this industry. Just, it's a bulldozer. It breaks you. It mentally breaks you. Physically, it breaks you. Like, you have to give so much. And when I see Yankos, I'm like, oh, this is why we all did what we do. and that soothes me. You know, deep inside, I think that everybody that worked for long enough in esports has been hurt either by burnout, overworking, you know, disappointments, all these things that happen in a short, like a young industry. Looking at Yonkos really inspires me because I'm like, oh yeah, it's about playing a game and having fun at the end of the day, and he crystallizes it to my eyes.
I love it. I think it's such a point with Faker as well, where it's like it seems like it's more about the love of the game or the love of the team, even more than the winning or the competition itself. It reminds me of Georges St Pierre, the MMA fighter, when he's talking about retiring, and he's saying, like, I'm not like I want to keep studying. That's what I want to study the sport. I want to study the martial art. I want to like progress still, not to fight, but just for the love of the pursuit itself, I guess. Next question is, what is the biggest hardship you experienced as a coach, or the difficult situation?
This is the only one piece of advice I gave to another coach. This is the last piece of advice I ever gave to a coach in person. I will not say the name to the person I gave it to, but I told this person, if you're not ready to lose everything for your ideas, don't show up, because people, you have to be willing to die for it. I think that my first 2 years as a coach, I was convinced that I had to die on the field. And after 2 years, I got very tired because my environment was pretty hectic. I mean, I don't know if you heard about the whole history of Uptake, but it was a pretty hectic 2 years. Like, I mean, very, very complex years. I was very tired. I got renewed. I went into Immortals. And deep in myself, I had a voice that I should have put my life and myself on the line more, and I try to protect myself. And I think that that's an advice for anyone that wants to compete, like the world competition in general, whether it's chess, league, or cooking contest, doesn't matter. It's one of the few things in my life where like I lost, but I didn't choose the deck. Like, it's not they forced me into a player. I just advise for everyone, don't try to read in between the lines. But I feel like this year I didn't stand my ground, and I haven't been good to myself, and I haven't been good to my players, and I haven't been good to the fans of Immortals, if there were some, because I out of probably tiredness, probably a little bit of cowardice, I didn't do everything that I should have done. And when I lost my job, this hurts way more than because when you're there wasn't that many French coach, and I'm not an influencer, but I'm a content creator. I was a caster, so I'm pretty known. People talk to me. The bad messages, the hatred of some, the confirmation that I was a fraud, all these negative emotion you can navigate through, but your inner voice telling you you failed yourself is the worst thing that you can ever do. And in an industry where short term and as I say, maximizing your own career seems to be the best path, I would say that when it stops, the most violent reality you have is you only have very few shots in your life at doing the things you like the way you want to do it, and you should do it. So that's probably the biggest hardship.
Yeah, I resonate with that so much. I think in my
I'm
career,
so much better, dude. I'm so much better today than I was, and I'm like, but this like the job of coach is so hard. It is so hard. It is beautiful and a nightmare at the same time.
It reminds me of, there's a Jim Carrey speech, like a commencement speech that he was giving, and he was talking about a story from his father, who something like always wanted to be a writer, but decided to take a safe career instead as an accountant or something. And then after a long career in that, he was made redundant. And Jim Carrey was saying, like, the biggest lesson that I learned from my father is that you can fail at what you don't want to do. So you might as well take a chance at what you do. And I think that's quite That's just what I was thinking as you were going through, and I was thinking back to all my experiences. There's so many teams. I mean, even Solari as well. It's like every time I fought more for my ideas, but I, especially now, would say I never fought anywhere near enough for them. And
I should have died on the pitch. I should have
exactly,
said, fire me,
yeah,
just fire me now.
yeah,
It's my way or no way. You can find someone else. And
yeah,
you know, I've done the tryouts last year for Excel. I didn't get selected, and I'm fine with it. And you know, that's literally the negotiation I had with them. It's like I'll do it the way I want to do it. And when they called me and I was like, "Oh, we're gonna go with Hidden," which I think he's doing a very good job. Props to him. I was relieved. I was so much relieved. The no felt so good. I didn't care. Of course, getting a no is never pleasant, but at least I was like, okay, I said exactly, I laid out exactly what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do, and they didn't trust it, meaning we're both satisfied. It hurts, but we're both satisfied because I don't have to work in a job where I can't express myself at the highest level, and I need to be at my highest level, and they will not regret choosing me. And that's the best of both worlds. And I think that for everyone who wants to do that, whether it's a player, a coach, or anyone in the field, you gotta have this mentality of making sure that you will fail doing it your way, because we all fail eventually. Like there is only faker that wins at the end anyway. So
yeah. And at the end, fake is just inevitable.
yeah.
Okay, we'll make it a little bit happier then. What is your top highlight? As actually, you could just in your career, let's say, rather than necessarily as a coach.
It was the group stage of Worlds when I was a caster in 2015. It came after a year, a very, very, very hard year. You know, the bad years of your 20s, everybody has some. So mine was 2014. And so I came in 2015, and after I had a pretty bad incident in my life, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, I'm gonna do this esports thing. Like that's what makes your heart beat, so you're gonna do it. And so I decided to come and cast after my work. I had a 9 to 5 every single week. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays, I was doing the NA, and then I was going back at 3 a.m., sleeping and going back for Monday, you know. And then at the end of the year, the broadcaster came and was like, "Oh, you're selected. Like, you're gonna be on stage." And I remember we spent 2 weeks, and because the transport our dog in Paris, we had a small hotel where we all stayed, and we spent 2 weeks following the group stage in a hotel. And there was a bar below the hotel where all the players would come. And I didn't know any pro players back then. It was my first experience with meeting pros and rioters and stuff. First time I met Shocks, for instance, stuff like this. It's where I've actually met Laure in person, who became my best friend. And I think these 2 weeks were really the peak of my esport life, because it was still a time where things felt very passionate, and the amateur part of it was really embraced. It did not pretend to be more than what it was, and it was the moment where my heart beat the most. Like the first time I just interacted with a crowd and stuff like this. Even though I did the finals of MSI in 2018, I did Worlds. I've been a coach and stuff like this. It's probably not the peak in terms of emotion. The peak of emotion was probably accessing to playoff with the lowest budget teams in 2019. But this time was like kind of the peak of my 20s, and there are memories that are that good that they bind you to people for life, no matter what happens after. There's a lot of people that barely talk to, but we have this memory to bind us for the rest of our life, that we were there and we did that together, and that's something that's very soothing to me.
Great. What are 3 non-negotiable behaviors that you and people around you need to buy into?
I would have said don't sugarcoat it, but I think I've discovered in my 30s that sugarcoating doesn't exist. It's just optimizing speech for people to the kind of optimizing people, you know, making them easier to digest. No lies. I can't stand lies. It's really something I can't. would say this would the thing I said to the coach: die for ideas or don't show. And the third one is I think that's something that's very important to me, is to be intellectually honest. I really can't stand people saying, the thing of like, oh yeah, Kalista is a bad pick because the two bottom teams picked it and they lost with it. Like, this is I would never be able to live in a world. I create my surroundings and my world with people. I choose my people that are able to grasp causality concepts and stuff like this, because that really hurts me to interact with people that will either they can't grasp it, which I don't think a lot of people can't grasp it. I think most people can, but I think it's being dishonest intellectually is one of the most hurting process you can have in between humans.
And I think it's like you say, I think people can do it. It's just the effort. And I guess on the reverse side is like, the more you are dishonest around that, even internally, the easier it becomes. You get more.
The problem is then it breaks everything. It's really like, it's really the Pandora's box. That's why I say don't know lies, because if you start breaking the laws of logic, or you deny facts, or you try to create correlation, like you misunderstand correlation and causality, or implication and equivalence. If you start doing that, then nothing makes sense. So then, lies just become facts, and that I feel like it is still very important, at least for me, that my interaction with people stay in a frame of logic and that we can go back to what we said and evaluate it. I know that ego gets in the way for everyone, myself included. Nobody is perfect. But at the end of the day, I think I was wrong was one of the most beautiful things that anyone can say, because it's so hard to say.
And I think I love the goal of like, well, just don't tell lies, because it's so much harder than you think. It's something that I struggle with a lot, because especially when I was younger, I used to be able to sort of talk enough so that everyone would just eventually like believe what I was saying. And I've maybe internalized that a lot more than I should have done. And it was difficult, and is and continues to be difficult, to catch yourself when you're saying something that, like, I'm not actually sure this is true, as I'm saying it as if it's true. And it's difficult, and it's a process. It takes a long time, but it is such a good goal to be aiming at, because you're right, like you're putting this stuff out in the world, and it shapes what is around you, and it shapes the people that you interact with, and it just covers
It's hard
everything.
on the internet.
Yeah,
it is hard on the internet. Dom was speaking about it on his stream, and it was very interesting, because he was like, yeah, some people come on my stream and they're like, yeah, Dom, you say JDG was the best and T1 was the best, you were wrong. And it's like, you know what? Yeah, I was wrong. And it's like, we were saying, it's never, oh yeah, true, thanks for acknowledging that. It's like, yeah, you see, you're just and then it's just a bunch of slur words just to kind of like, and I feel like the internet has become a place where saying I was wrong feels so bad, because that there is a lot of people waiting around the corner to shoot at you. The truth is, you'll survive to that. And saying I was wrong when you were wrong will pay off big time in the long term.
There's a quote from Nietzsche, which I'm going to butcher, but it's something like, a snake cannot survive if it can't shed its skin. And in the same way, a mind cannot survive unless it acknowledges its wrongness or mistakes or something like that. Okay, last question. You've sort of answered this already, but if there's a different one that comes to mind as well, that'd be interesting. If you, from today, could give yourself one piece of advice when you first started your coaching journey, what would it be?
Work more. Like, do the impossible. Know that I'm that competent. I know I could have become way more competent. Of course, time takes a huge part, but I think that I could have probably condensed a little bit more. I had to condense a lot. I was a single coach for like the first split and stuff. But looking back at it, I think I should have given twice as much, at least. I was not compliant at all. Complacent, sorry. I was not complacent at all. I was I was working every single day, but I think I could have done more, and I should have done more.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on. That's
Thanks.
as long as my brain can keep everything together. So
I mean, yeah,
we'll have
it
to
was
do
a
another.
pleasure, man.